Bernice Summerfield, archaeologist and adventurer, made her first appearance in 1992. Since then, she's starred in more than 100 books, comic strips and audio plays.
The secret of the success has been in the strength of the character that Paul Cornell created in the first place. The fact that the people who've been in charge of the series have shown a real devotion to the character and have wanted to make it right.
No one, I don't think, could have sat down and said 20 years ago, one day Bernice Summerfield will be in her own range of audios, her own range of books, her own range of videos, and still going strong. But it's brilliant, and I think it's a testament completely to Paul's original vision of her, and then subsequently Lisa's involvement. I think the two of them together have proved that Bernice can keep going forever.
Gary Russell at Big Finish was the reason that she kept going in the first place. I didn't think that they'd sell at the time, never mind that we'd still be here 20 years later. And I'm incredibly pleasantly surprised, and that's because he's invested so much of his life and personality into her. I think that there's a bit of Gary Russell in Bernice Summerfield.
Part of Benny's success is the way the series has reinvented itself. This year sees a bold new look for Benny.
I think the whole reason we wanted to rebrand Benny was because the series has been running for 12 years now. First thing we did at Big Finish back in '98. And we thought that it would be quite a nice idea that as we were moving away from sort of the monthly individual releases and going into the sort of box set thing, to go, let's rebrand it, let's give it a big kick-off and start again and make it just something different, a good jumping on point.
We just wanted to make it very clear to new listeners that the world that had built up around it doesn't necessarily have to exclude them.
Because when you've had a series that runs for 12 years, it's very easy to get so caught up with it, and both storylines and everything else, you forget that there'll be some people wanting to come in and go, this is my first experience of Bernice Summerfield.
We had big meetings about, I suppose you could call it a reboot to a certain extent, and how we were going to see her making different journeys, how we can mix it up a bit and not rely on everything that we've used before.
This is a good point to draw a line and go, that was seasons 1 to 11, that was great. None of that's gone, it's all still there, that's all tells our story. But we wanted people to be able to go, I can pick up this Atlantis box set, and if need be, not necessarily have listened to the previous 11 years of Benny.
And I don't think there's anything better for an audience to know that something has changed and something's different, that something's new, than when you change everything around it.
It just made more sense then that if we were going to rebrand, well, let's do a new style of cover, let's put Lisa on the cover, because if you're going to a convention and Lisa is there, it's nice to have a photograph or an image of her on the front rather than a drawing.
This is one of the few times we've done a proper photo shoot at Big Finish. I know that John Ainsworth organised one with Liz Sladen for the Sarah Jane Smith, and we've recently photographed a few people in costume for Dark Shadows, but this is a full-on photo shoot, and hopefully this is going to give us a really filmic look. It's going to give us a much bolder look for Benny. I'm drawing on some of the more graphical styles of recent films like 300 and Sin City, and I hope that kind of influence will help really show that this is a different Benny and this is a newer Benny.
But also with the logo as well, it again just it wipes the slate entirely clean. It's a new brand, it's a new Benny.
It's about her as an archaeologist, so I wanted to literally represent the fact that she's someone who digs in the ground. So the element of Bernice is above ground and Summerfield is excavated from the black area below. I wanted something much bolder and much more simple that we could, print very clearly, print in exciting new colours, and really get a kind of clear, crisp line, which is the sort of look I'm going for with the imagery, and it seemed sensible to match it with the text as well.
It's amazing, and I am so grateful for the fact that Jason and Gary and Nick and all the guys at Big Finish have continued to show incredible faith in the character and the series. I mean, I don't think it's just a personal thing. There's a sort of, I think there's a sort of an affection for Benny because she was the first Big Finish project. I'm
very grateful to them. I don't say that enough. I think Big Finish have done wonderful things with that character, and one cannot say thank you enough.
Gary Russell, returning as producer of Benny's Adventures, is keen to get back to basics.
When I first came back, one of my first questions was, is Paul Cornell involved in this? Bernice is his character, he created her.
I have this awkward combination of being protective and not having the time or the space to do much to actually help. But when I'm asked for my opinion, I do give it. And I think that in this particular case, that managed to be useful rather than difficult. And Gary's very supportive of my right to move in and, you know, put my paddle in every now and then.
I need to know Paul is with this, Paul is okay with all this. And so we had a big meeting, and Lisa and myself and the Big Finish people, and Paul was there. And then Paul and I went out for a meal afterwards, and we really thrashed through everything I wanted to do, let's say ideally for the next 3 or 4 years. And so the two of us were in sync with each other, and he'd go, I'm not sure about this, and I'd go, but we could do this and this and this, and he'd go, but if you do that and that, I don't think that works. So it's quite nice to work with Paul as a sort of executive producer, because it's his character, and I didn't want to deviate. I didn't want to let him feel that we were running away with his character and doing things that he didn't approve of.
There have been some major changes in Benny's life recently. In the last series, she said goodbye to her home on the Braxitel collection and concluded a plotline that had run for 10 years.
There was a lot of plot to be resolved over a very long arc, which we just about tied up last season.
The collection and Brax and everything, and Adrian and all that stuff had been such a good backbone of Benny for probably 10, 11 of those 12 years. It was good to sort of go off in a slightly different direction.
It makes sense to us now we're stripping back to focus on Benny, to remove those characters and take them back and not necessarily forget about them, but park them for a bit.
What I really like about Benny is Benny. The supporting characters are lovely, the family are great, but let's focus on Benny for a year or so and just take her off somewhere and give her a new background. And then these new characters come in and they can form what happens in the story. And eventually, I have no doubt this will lead us back to Brax or other people from the collection. I think the collection itself and that planetoid is probably gone. But at the moment, it's about Bernice Summerfield and what she does.
The one thing Gary and I were very keen on doing with the new series of Benny and the new series to come is to go back to standalone stories that don't form part of an ongoing story arc. And the brilliant thing about box sets is our audience who would have bought them would have committed to that block of 4 or 3 stories or whatever. So we can do mini ongoing storylines within that. But it means that if people pick up a box set later on, there won't be anything carrying over.
Actually, that'll give a nice sort of movement to the series, because each 3 CD box will give something for the next CD box, and it's nice to have that reason to listen to the next 3, and also to be able to give a story arc over 3 in particular, I think is very good, rather than going, we'll have a standalone there and then we'll have a couple that picks up the plot that we forgot about in the last one, and I think that's going to be very good.
The new series finds Benny stuck on Atlantis.
We created this idea, and there's things going on, and there's things in the background, and it all, by the time we get to the end of episode 4, everything is sorted out and explained. But there's these little weaving arcs. There's something I've always had a fascination with memory. I think people who lose their memory must bring this horrific thing in the world because your identity is gone. And so that's something I really wanted to play with, the idea of people's memories going. Some people will be talking to you 1 minute and you'll see them an hour later and they'll go, no, I've never met you before.
Gary and Scott Hancock, the script editor, did have certain things that they needed me to do, but also I couldn't really reference anything that was to come. I was aware of what was happening in the other stories, but I wasn't allowed to reference them, which made it quite difficult. That Bernice has a mystery to solve, but Gary didn't really want her solving the mystery at this point.
Every time Benny thinks she's getting close to something or someone is pulling the rug out from underneath her, and she's got to find out who's doing this and why, so that she can eventually get off this planet, whether it's Earth or Atlantis or whatever it turns out to be, and get, hopefully, home.
Benny's not alone on Atlantis. The series also introduces some new regular characters.
Well, I'm playing, Leonidas, in fact. We had a bit of a debate about how his name was pronounced today, but Leonidas, who is an ancient Greek historian who meets Bernie Summerfield, or has, in fact, sort of been looking for Bernie Summerfield because he needs help to uncover something. And there's a romance that is clearly blossoming.
Leo is a sort of a kind of love interest, actually. That's all I'm saying. You have to find out what happens.
And then in the middle of this is Ruth, who's this very young girl who's priestess for Poseidon, who absolutely adores Leo, looks up to him, worships Leo, thinks he's fantastic because she sees him as a bit of a father figure, and sees Benny coming in as a sort of almost like a mother figure, and you get the impression that Ruth's like, could you two get together, because this would make a great family thing.
My character is Ruth. She's quite a mysterious character in that she's not very sure if her memories are her own, or if they're reality, or if it's some kind of fiction. So I think, she's quite an enigma.
Whose hand am I holding? It's all right.
It's very fast. You're finding out new information every new scene. So I think in that respect, it kind of keeps the audience on its toes, but it keeps the actor on their toes as well, because you're constantly learning new things about the character, which is great, because it stops it from kind of being two-dimensional. There's always another layer to the character, she's always fun to play.
In comparison to somebody like Bev Tarrant that Bernice has had to bounce off in the past, they're very much on a level. Braxitel was her boss, Peter was her son, there was Haas. There's never been that sort of student-teacher element to a relationship before, and I think that also might give a new dynamic.
Because suddenly Benny is responsible for a man who's her equal, rather than, as she has been with Brax, a man she fights with. And also there's Ruth there, and she's got to become responsible for Ruth, and Leah's responsible for Ruth. So they create this kind of nuclear family that's a bit slightly off kilter, but could be a lot of fun.
I love what's going to come up here. I think you will too. And I'm just so proud of it. And this gang are doing tremendous things with Benny Summerfield, and I couldn't be happier, and I couldn't be more pleased with it.